Four college students crossed a lonely road in the Utah desert and suddenly found themselves surrounded by green fields, a massive lake, and strange vehicles that seemed to follow them. A woman woke up to discover her boyfriend apparently never existed. The pilot saw an abandoned airfield fully restored 4 years before it actually was, and a soldier somehow appeared in Mexico just moments after standing guard in the Philippines. These are glitches in reality people actually lived through. Back in 2019, a Reddit user named BB Shuri traveled to Greece with her mom and young sister for a 5-day vacation. On the very first day at the hotel, the Redditor noticed a woman sitting with her partner and 3 kids. The second BB saw her face, she was hit with what she described as an overwhelming feeling of recognition and love. It wasn't the normal, maybe I know this person from somewhere kind of feeling. It felt more like seeing someone she'd grown up with. The woman clearly wasn't related to her though. The Redditor immediately told her mom about the experience, expecting to sound crazy, but her mom actually admitted she felt the exact same strange feeling when she saw the woman. For the next few days, BB became obsessed with trying to figure out where she could have possibly known the woman from. On the last night of the trip, the Redditor, her mom, and little sister were sitting by the pool drinking mocktails when the woman's toddler wandered over to their table. That finally led to a conversation between the two families. BB decided to just be honest and tell the woman she felt like she somehow knew her from somewhere. Instead of being weirded out, the woman immediately responded that she'd been feeling the exact same thing the entire trip. She even said the Redditor's slightly raspy voice sounded familiar to her. So for the next half hour, the two compared everything they could think of, including where they lived, worked, traveled, who they knew, but there was no connection. By the end of the conversation, BB Shuri said the only explanation that made sense to her was that they somehow recognized each other on what she described as a soul level. Back in 1972, 4 female college students were driving home to their dorms in Utah after a weekend trip. They were on a familiar desert road near the Nevada border when they crossed a set of railroad tracks and everything changed. The dry, sandy desert was gone, and in its place were green fields of grain and a massive lake. Obviously, they had no idea what the hell was going on. Confused, they tried to just turn around and head back the way they came, but that's when they noticed 4 strange, egg-shaped vehicles following them. They weren't cars, at least not ones they'd ever seen. These ones had 3 wheels and made a high-pitched humming sound. At this point, they weren't just confused, they were terrified. The driver sped off, hoping to find the road they came from. As they drove through a narrow pass, the scenery flickered, and suddenly they were back in the Utah desert, but it crashed into a ditch. When the police arrived to help them, they found something very odd. The car's tire tracks seemed to stop abruptly in the middle of the desert. There were no tracks leading from the road to the ditch. It was as if the car had simply dropped out of the sky and landed there. The girls maintained their story for years, insisting they'd somehow driven into some sort of parallel reality. In 1901, 2 teachers named Charlotte Mobley and Eleanor Jourdain were visiting the Palace of Versailles in France. While walking toward a small building called the Petit Trianon, they both felt a sudden heavy wave of sadness and a strange stillness in the air. They claimed the wind stopped and everything looked flat, like a painting. They ran into men dressed in long, old-fashioned clothes and small hats who told them which way to go. Eventually, they saw a woman sitting on the grass in an elaborate gown sketching in a notebook. They didn't think much of it until they looked at the maps later. The bridges they crossed, the kiosks they walked past, they apparently didn't exist. And when they returned to the site months later, the landscape was completely different. The paths they'd taken were overgrown or blocked by old walls that had been there for centuries. After some research, they became convinced they'd walked onto the grounds as they appeared in the late 1700s. And the woman with the sketchbook, she looked just like Marie Antoinette. Their account was so detailed, it remains one of the most famous examples of a glitch in reality ever recorded. In October of 1593, a soldier appeared in the main square of Mexico City. He was wearing the uniform of the guards who protected the governor's palace in Manila, in the Philippines. This was pretty strange because the Philippines are thousands of miles away across the Pacific Ocean. Back then, a trip between the two places took months by ship. The soldier, Gil Perez, was just as confused as everyone else, telling the authorities that he'd been on duty in Manila just a few minutes ago. According to him, the governor of Manila had just been killed by Chinese pirates. Not knowing what to do with him, they just threw the soldier in jail. But just 2 months later, a ship arrived from the Philippines, and the crew confirmed the governor had indeed been unalived on the exact day Perez appeared in Mexico. More shocking, one of the passengers on the ship recognized Perez and testified that he'd seen the soldier at the Palace of Manila right before the incident. On July 16, 2008, a Spanish woman named Lorena Garcia Gordo wrote a post on a forum that would go down as one of the most famous cases of reality shifting in modern history. She woke up on what she thought was a normal Monday morning, but as she started her day, she realized her life seemed to be slightly altered. For starters, her bed sheets were a different color. When she went to her job of 20 years, she found her office was in a completely different part of the building, and her boss was a man she'd never met. She was so confused that she just checked her ID and her bank accounts, but they all said she was exactly who she thought she was, thankfully. The most disturbing part involved her personal life, though. She'd been dating a man named Augustin for months, but when she tried to call him, his number didn't work. When she went to his house, he wasn't there. She eventually just hired a private investigator to find him, but the investigator told her there was no record of an Augustin living in that city at all. Somehow Lorena had woken up in a version of reality that was slightly different from the one she grew up in. In 2011, a crowd of about 12,000 people had gathered for a concert on a hot summer night. The weather was getting worse and a massive storm was moving in. Just as an announcer told the crowd that a storm was coming, but that they hoped the show would go on, a huge gust of wind, measured at nearly 70 miles per hour, hit the massive steel stage, holding thousands of pounds of lights and speakers, and in a few seconds, the entire rigging started to lean forward. Fans caught the whole thing on their phones as the steel beams groaned and then completely gave way, crashing down onto the people standing in the front row. 7 people lost their lives, and dozens more were trapped under the heavy metal. It's incredibly disturbing and sad how quickly the atmosphere changed from this fun night out to just total destruction. In May of 1985, the European Cup final was held at Heysel Stadium in Brussels, Belgium. The stadium was a bit of a dump. The concrete was crumbling and security was a mess. The organizers had put a group of neutral Belgian fans in Section Z right next to the most hardcore Liverpool supporters, with only a thin wire fence separating them. Well, about an hour before kickoff, attention snapped, and Liverpool fans started throwing stones over the fence, and then they charged. The people in Section Z were just families and regular fans who had nowhere to go. They ran toward a concrete perimeter wall at the edge of the section to get away from the chaos. And the sheer weight of hundreds of people being pushed and crushed against the wall was too much for the old building. The concrete finally gave way and collapsed on top of them. 39 people died and hundreds more were hurt. And the most disturbing part is what happened next. Even though bodies were being carried out on pieces of fencing used as makeshift stretchers, the game went on. They were terrified that if they canceled it, the riots would burn down the city. So the players went out and played the full 90 minutes with dead bodies lying just outside the stadium walls.
From the sky out of nowhere and hits the side of Jeff's camera.
What? The arrow!
What you just saw there was footage from KTVN2 News, Nevada. Arrow hit the side of the camera. The crew was covering the story of an infamous entity known as Whiskey Bill. The tale goes back to the Prohibition era. William Whiskey Bill Johnson, a bootlegger who ran an early desert distillery in the 1920s, became well known among miners and settlers for his whiskey. But once Prohibition hit, he went underground and kept producing it illegally. After his death, people started reporting strange activity around the abandoned ruins of his distillery in the Nevada desert. Visitors claimed to hear laughter, clinking glasses, and faint sounds like a busy bar still operating long after it shut down. Some also report sudden cold spots, the smell of whiskey in the air, and arrows being fired out of thin air. This news crew captured some strange things as well, like sound.
Kid you not, at one point of the evening, we heard what sounded like a big band from the 1920s playing on a gramophone.
I was gonna play back. Shh! That's music!
They also spoke to an investigator named Kelly Latham who captured this eerie image.
Yeah, and it's all to see if the paranormal activity appears right when the picture is taken. And sure enough, something did. On me.
What? It's on me? No.
This strange clip comes from an Albanian talk show. Not sure exactly what the hosts were talking about because I don't speak Albanian, but given the upbeat music and the Amy Winehouse name drop,
Sot me dëgjuat nga e ndjera, Amy Winehouse, Altini e solli këtu.
I get the sense it's some kind of entertainment music type show. Anyway, not long into the conversation, a newspaper sitting on the desk does something a newspaper isn't supposed to do unless there's a very, very strong gust of wind.
Pjesa më e madhe janë pushim dhe po e shijojnë dhe një ditë mrekullueshme që është përjashta. Wow.
I mean, wow is right. That paper just flew off the desk. I mean, we're not talking about like a subtle movement here. If this had been filmed outside, I probably wouldn't have bothered throwing this on the list, but this is an enclosed studio. Even if someone had opened a door and a gust of air rushed in, you'd think the other papers on the desk would have moved too, even just a little bit, but no. All that flies away is that one newspaper. The host also picks it up to examine it. Doesn't appear to have a wire on it. Could it be a hoax, a prank on the hosts? Sure, but I'll let you decide. What do you think? Was this some sort of publicity stunt, or was something genuinely weird captured on live TV? During an episode of the Mexican morning show Sale al Sol, a psychic and clairvoyant, Mondi Vidente, was discussing angels and ghosts, spiritualism, I don't know, whatever it is clairvoyants ramble on about. Then suddenly, a piece of the set fell down. What freaked people out had more to do with when this happened in the conversation. As they got to talking specifically about supernatural, that's when the set decoration toppled down. And that wasn't it, because moments later, another set decoration appeared to rotate on its own, catching the attention of host Carlos Arenas, who immediately pointed it out. This led some viewers to wonder if this discussion about the spiritual realm had somehow set off the activity. Had the psychic accidentally summoned a ghost? Well, she thought so. After the broadcast, Vidente posted on social media that she'd sensed a, quote, powerful spirit emerge at the exact moment the objects began to move.
Pounds each, you know, hands up, I bought them to
Look, that
resell.
chair's beginning
Chair's
to rock.
rocking.
Look at that.
Who's doing that? Stop it. Who's doing that?
During a 2017 episode of the British talk show This Morning, a couple were featured with their possessed doll. Throughout the interview, a chair the doll was sitting on began rocking on its own, multiple times. For some background, a couple had been out one day walking past an antique store when they spotted some old dolls in the window. They figured, hey, they're cheap, maybe we can flip them for a profit, so they grabbed a few. But the second these dolls came through the front door, weird stuff starts happening. They had one of them, the one they actually brought to the studio, sitting on the dresser in their bedroom, and one morning the husband gets up, jumps in the shower, and out of nowhere feels this burning sensation on his leg. It wasn't the water. So they moved the doll into their shed and stuck it inside a plastic bin. A couple days go by, the wife goes out to check on it, opens the bin, and the doll's necklace is missing. When they put it in there though, it had been wrapped up tight. And on the night before their appearance on the show, they had a weird experience in their hotel room.
2 o'clock in the morning, I woke up and heard like a swishing noise going around my side of the bed.
She said it sounded like someone's clothing rustling as they walked by the bed. Of course, nothing was there. Ended up getting rid of that doll. During a live morning broadcast in Honduras, journalist Carlos Molina had a pretty wild moment on air. While he and his co-host Pablo Zapata were reading through viewer messages, he freezes. His glass of water had slid across the table on its own, seemingly. He also mentioned that right before it happened, he'd felt this chill run down his spine. Carlos was pretty adamant that nobody on the crew was messing with him. He said, and this is his own words, "I felt something strange in my body. The action didn't just demonstrate itself in the glass, but in me as well. What I felt was a supernatural phenomenon, a chill throughout my body before the glass moved," end quote. The table was completely flat, no strings, no wires. I'm gonna play a couple clips from this news coverage in Jamaica. What's your immediate reaction?
Yeah.
Back in 2010, a Jamaican news station ran a story on a boy who said he was being haunted by a type of spirit known as a duppy. The news crew managed to capture those two separate weird moments on camera, but this had supposedly been going on for a while. The boy and his family believed that he was being targeted by this dark entity, constantly tugging at him. When he got pulled back that second time, watch his legs. One of them is up in the air as he's moving backward, and then his mom rushes over and grabs him, and they do this spinny, kind of like helicopter motion. Not impossible to fake, obviously, but it is a neat detail. Put yourself in the shoes of some dude tuning into the Playboy channel in 1987. You know, you have a mullet, you just finished cruising the highway with your top down blasting Motley Crue on the radio, and the best way to top off the day is to tune in to the channel with maybe a brew or two. That was the 80s, right? Well, on this day, you're in the middle of your spicy movie when all of a sudden the screen gets overtaken by this black background with a simple white message quoting Bible verses telling people to honor the Sabbath and repent. That kind of kills the vibe. Well, the FCC eventually zeroed in on a guy named Thomas Haney, who worked as an uplink engineer for the Christian Broadcasting Network. Even though the message didn't say where it came from, investigators noticed certain video fingerprints, subtle traces in the signal that hinted at the type of equipment used, and from that they connected it to CBN. The station denied being involved, of course. Haney swore he was innocent, and CBN said their gear couldn't have even pulled it off. They tried to recreate the hijack using the same setup and failed, but the government argued otherwise, saying that it was possible and that Haney had the access and technical know-how. Eventually, a jury convicted him on 2 counts, though he was cleared of interfering with another adult channel due to poor video evidence. He didn't serve time, but he did get probation, a fine, and community service. Gotta say, I'm no expert on things like this, but I don't think things would play out the same way today. I don't know. I don't think the dude would have gotten in nearly as much trouble today. Society's just, I don't know. A lot more prudish these days. They took their Playboy very seriously back in the 80s, it seems. Imagine chilling out on a regular afternoon, maybe watching the Steve Wilkos show, when suddenly your TV flashes this strange emergency alert. Only it isn't about a tornado or an Amber Alert. Instead, it's describing the bodies of the dead rising from their graves and attacking the living. On February 11th, 2013, people across the US were watching normal daytime TV when the screen suddenly cut to an emergency alert. And it was exactly what I just described. It sounded like the same system used for real disasters, except it was about zombies. It was on screen for a while. I gotta assume some people actually started freaking out, especially all those folks with bunkers full of canned food, but then programming snapped back to normal. Turned out hackers had broken into station equipment that was badly secured and used it to send these fake alerts, but they never found out who actually did this. In September 1985, during communist rule in Poland, 4 astronomers in the city of Torun did something extraordinary. They hijacked the state TV signal and replaced normal programming with text messages supporting the Solidarity Movement, a labor union and political group fighting against government oppression. The messages criticized rising food prices, the government's lies, and the control that they had over everyone's lives. It was a direct political protest. People couldn't believe what they were looking at. The state controlled all broadcasting, and independent messages were almost impossible to show. Pulling this off required technical knowledge of the broadcasting system. The astronomers had figured out how to override the state transmitter and insert their messages live. The interruption lasted only a few minutes, but it was long enough to be noticed by thousands of viewers. Eventually, the 4 were caught, prosecuted, but the broadcast became legendary because it was one of the first live TV signal hijacks used explicitly as a political protest, unlike some other less serious hijacks on this list. On January 4th, 2000, kids in the Philippines were watching Teletubbies on GMA Network, which was one of the most popular children's shows on TV at the time. We all know the Teletubbies, as much as some of us would want to forget it. I know a number of folks who grew up with this show and thought it was just some strange fever dream they had, but right in the middle of the broadcast, the show cut out for a few seconds. Instead of the weird, multicolored aliens with pure black eyes kids were used to gawking at, the screen showed a still image of Rosana Rosas, who was widely known in the Philippines at the time for adult roles and some adult film work. No, she was not making a guest appearance on the Teletubbies. This was obviously not supposed to air during a kid's time slot. The interruption was short, but it didn't matter. Parents noticed immediately. Kids noticed. People called the station asking what had just happened. The image vanished, Teletubbies came back on, and the show continued as if nothing had happened. Turned out that the wrong clip was loaded or triggered during live transmission somehow, and because it was live, it went straight to air. Even years later, this gets brought up as one of the strangest, most uncomfortable live TV mistakes in Philippine broadcast history. On November 10th, 2017, people in Malmo, Sweden tuned in to Mix Megapol, a major commercial radio station. Normally, it's non-stop music, DJs, ads, the usual, but that morning, listeners started hearing something completely different. The station had been pushed off its own frequency. For about 30 minutes, the normal broadcast was replaced by an unauthorized transmission playing propaganda. Anyone listening in the area heard the takeover instead of Mix Megapol's programming. Someone had used a pirate radio transmitter strong enough to overpower the station's signal in that area. As long as that transmitter stayed on, the real station couldn't reach listeners. After about half an hour, the hijacked signal finally stopped and Mix Megapol came back on the air. That was the end of it. They never caught who did it. On November 26, 1977, viewers across southern England were watching the evening news when something went wrong. Very wrong. The picture stayed normal, but the audio was suddenly taken over by a deep, calm, distorted voice that identified itself as Vrillon, a representative of the Ashtar Galactic Command. And for over 5 minutes, the voice delivered a strange message claiming to come from space. It warned humanity about nuclear weapons and the negative impact we lowly humans were having on the environment, urging people to abandon their weapons and live in peace. Now, obviously this was not a studio mistake. Someone had overridden the broadcast audio signal, which again meant whoever this was knew exactly what they were doing. Investigators also believed the hijacker had to be physically nearby to pull this off, but nobody was ever identified or charged. Decades later, it's still one of the craziest broadcast interruptions in history. In early 2002, cable TV viewers in cities across China suddenly had their regular programming cut off by something completely different. It was a coordinated hijack carried out by members of Falun Gong, a spiritual group that had been heavily cracked down on by the Chinese government. The goal is to push back against the official stories surrounding a highly publicized incident from the year before. The clips accused the state of lying and called to an end to the persecution of Falun Gong. How long it lasted depended on where you were. In some cities it was over in a few minutes, in others, people reported it running for close to an hour, and in a few cases, even longer. This wasn't done remotely or through computers. The people involved physically tapped into cable broadcasting lines, which meant scouting locations, accessing equipment, and taking serious risks to pull it off. A few months later, police arrested 15 people tied to the hijack, and apparently, a bunch of them just happened to die in custody. In 1980, a cartoon called the Plastic Man Comedy Adventure Show was airing in Atlanta. And right in the middle of a commercial break, the screen suddenly cut to a still photo of a nude woman for just a couple seconds. The image had been spliced into a Georgia Forestry Commission ad. Turns out, it wasn't an accident. The station's general manager, Fred Barber, later said that 2 control operators had done it on purpose. These were the people who handled overnight sign-offs and morning startups. Apparently one of them liked splicing random stuff onto tapes as a joke. This time, a morning staffer didn't catch it before it went live. Both operators were fired immediately. In 1959, a few thousand people in Michigan tuned in to watch the World Series, only to have their screens go completely black for the first 3 games. First, everyone assumed it was just a technical issue, but it wasn't. A former station employee named Harold Lindgren had snuck into a relay station about 35 miles outside town and deliberately jammed the signal. In a pretty blunt way, too. He just shoved a bunch of steel wool into a pipe in the transmitter. He'd been fired a few weeks earlier and wanted revenge on the boss who let him go. Technicians from Chicago and Green Bay were brought in to figure out what had gone wrong. When police finally tracked him down, Lindgren didn't even attempt to hide anything. In 2007, Czech TV's Sunday morning show Panorama shocked a lot of viewers. Normally it was just calm footage of mountain resorts with soft background music. It was basically just a tourist ad, but on June 17th, one of the live cameras suddenly cut to what looked like a small nuclear explosion in the countryside. It only lasted a few seconds before the feed went static, which probably just made the whole thing more believable. The explosion was fake though, pure CGI, but it wasn't just added digitally later. A local art collective had physically tampered with the mountaintop camera to play their pre-recorded clip as if it were happening live. People freaked out, of course. Local tourism offices were pissed, worried it could scare visitors. Chuck TV looked into taking action, but the collective behind it just shrugged and called it a social experiment. They wanted people to stop trusting everything they saw on TV, and for a few terrifying seconds, it worked. In 1987, the Playboy channel was briefly hijacked by a black screen displaying white text quoting Bible verses, instructing viewers to honor the Sabbath and repent. The Federal Communications Commission looked into it, and their investigation eventually led to a man named Thomas Haney, an engineer for the Christian Broadcasting Network. They found subtle traces in the signal that matched CBN's equipment. CBN denied having any involvement, and Haney said he didn't do it. Tests trying to recreate the hijack with the same equipment failed, but they still argued that Haney had the access and knowledge to carry this out. So he was convicted on 2 accounts related to the hijack, but cleared of interfering with another adult channel due to lack of evidence. He didn't serve time, but he did receive probation, a fine, and community service. In May 2006, WBAB, a rock station based on Long Island, had its signal hijacked during a regular morning broadcast. Listeners were hearing Pink Floyd's Hey You when the song suddenly cut out. And what replaced it was probably the most racist song I've ever heard. I mean, yeah, we obviously can't play this for you here. It's full of all the worst slurs, modern and old school. The song was recorded in the 60s by Johnny Rebel, who was just an openly racist American singer. The song played for about a minute to a minute and a half before the station's normal feed returned. As for how this happened, it wasn't someone messing around with a weak pirate transmitter. The hijacker appeared to have overridden the station's studio to transmitter link, the signal stations use to send audio from the studio to the broadcast tower. To interrupt it, someone would have needed technical knowledge, the right equipment, and enough power to overpower the station's own signal. The station staff had no control while it was happening. Engineers couldn't cut it off remotely, which meant the interference was happening closer to the transmitter than the studio was. WBAB immediately called it a federal crime and contacted the FCC. And this wasn't the first time this had happened. A couple weeks earlier, the same song had briefly interrupted WBLI, WBAB's sister station. So for whatever reason, the person responsible was deliberately targeting those stations. But the FCC never made any statement about any arrests. As far as anyone knows, the person responsible got away with it. In 1977, viewers in Madison, Wisconsin, watching The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, experienced something completely unexpected. The broadcast was suddenly interrupted by this unknown video signal that replaced the show. There's never been a recording of the interruption released. The hijacked footage reportedly showed unrelated video that had nothing to do with NBC programming. After a short time, normal programming resumed, as if nothing had happened. What made this case strange is how little information ever came about afterward. The station acknowledged that there had been this unauthorized signal intrusion, but they never released any details aside from that. At the time, though, overriding a broadcast signal required what's called a line of sight access to transmission paths or relay equipment, meaning whoever did this must have known exactly how the station's setup worked. So it was either an insider or someone who just had a lot of technical knowledge of broadcast engineering. There's a case about interruptions on stations in Detroit during the mid-80s, but the internet's frustratingly thin when it comes to exactly what viewers saw. What is known is that people in Detroit at the time reported their TV pictures suddenly becoming distorted, the clear broadcast breaking up, flickering, and then showing imagery that didn't come from the station's own programming. This lasted for a while before finally returning to normal. Apparently, it had nothing to do with the weather or technical trouble or some internal station error. The interruption was something forced into the feed, but why? There was no clear message, there was no slogan or overlaid graphic or audio saying anything. It was just random visuals replacing the normal show for a moment. That's what separates it from a lot of the other hijacks on this list, where someone tries to make some kind of a point or just prank everyone. That's more on that later. Instead, this felt like someone poking at the system rather than trying to broadcast a message. An investigation was opened at the time, but nothing ever came of it. But this was WJBK, a major station. So the idea that someone could physically interrupt the signal without leaving a trace was kind of a big deal. In the early 80s, people watching HBO in various parts of the US started noticing something strange as well. During regular programming, the picture would sometimes drop out of the scheduled lineup and briefly show totally unrelated video or static, often with distorted sound. These interruptions bounced in and out without warning. Because HBO and other networks were being delivered by satellite back then, some people suspected the disruptions weren't just local cable issues, but something hitting the network before it even reached cable systems. The way the feeds worked at the time meant that someone with access to satellite uplinks or relay paths could theoretically inject a signal upstream, whatever the hell all that means. But it would cause the viewer to see something unexpected. As for what the hacker or hackers were trying to do though, who knows? There didn't seem to be any purpose behind them. They didn't repeat at the same times, they didn't target specific shows or networks. It didn't come with any text or voice explaining why they appeared. On April 27, 1986, HBO viewers were watching The Falcon and the Snowman when suddenly, right in the middle of the movie, the satellite signal was hijacked and a message appeared on screen. It was protesting HBO's subscription fees for home satellite dish owners. It was a pretty friendly message to anyone not working at HBO anyway, saying, "Good evening, HBO, from Captain Midnight, $12.95 a month? No way. Showtime/Movie Channel, beware." The interruption lasted about 4.5 minutes. Technicians at HBO tried to regain control of the feed, but the signal was strong enough that they couldn't override it. The broadcast was now out of their control. Eventually, the FBI and FCC tracked the intrusion back to a man named John R. McDougal, an electrical engineer who went by the name Captain Midnight, using equipment from his uplink station in Central Florida. He surrendered and was fined $5,000, sentenced to a year of probation, and had his amateur radio license suspended for a year. This next one goes all the way back to October 27, 1968. A bizarre broadcast incident in Palm Springs, California made local headlines when the off-air signal of then new ABC affiliate KPLM-TV was accidentally hijacked with some adult material. Shortly after the station had signed off and switched to its test pattern, viewers suddenly saw the racy film playing instead of the usual blank screen and bars. And it ran for a while too, about 15 minutes before the error was discovered and corrected. Turned out a 25-year-old technician named Alan Veach, who was alone in the studio that morning, had brought the videotape into the building. While he was watching it privately, somehow the playback ended up feeding into the line going to the cable company distribution center, which was live, sending the signal straight into people's homes. Police arrested Veach after the incident. He later pled guilty in federal court to violating laws against transmitting obscene material, and he was fined $500. I think the embarrassment was enough punishment alone, though. On February 1st, 2009, viewers in parts of Arizona tuning into the Super Bowl got a very unexpected surprise. During the fourth quarter of the game between the Arizona Cardinals and the Pittsburgh Steelers, the feed from NBC affiliate KVOA suddenly cut out, and for about 28 seconds, people saw explicit footage from the adult video Wild Cherries 5 instead of the game. Viewers across Tucson were stunned and horrified, watching what should have been the biggest football game of the year replaced with something, less family friendly. At first, Comcast, which delivered the signal to local cable systems, said this looked like a deliberate hijack and promised a full investigation. KVOA launched its own investigation as well. For a while, nobody knew who was responsible though. It wasn't until February 4th, 2011, more than 2 years later, that police arrested 38-year-old Frank Tenori Gonzalez, a former Cox Cable employee from Arizona. Gonzalez eventually pleaded guilty to 2 counts of computer tampering. He was sentenced to 3 years of probation and had to pay a $1,000 fine to the Arizona Attorney General's anti-racketeering fund. In April 2002, Venezuela was in chaos. Protests were happening all over the country, with clashes between supporters of President Hugo Chavez and the opposition. TV became a big part of the fight, with both sides trying to control what people saw. On April 12th, opposition-aligned military forces took over the state-owned channel VTV. The station went off the air, and anyone watching only saw cartoons or old movies instead of news. So the pro-Chavez side was completely cut off. At the same time, private channels were pushing the opposition. They showed anti-Chavez marches and urged the people to join the demonstrations. Pro-Chavez rallies barely got any coverage, creating a blackout for his supporters. Disruption lasted less than 2 days. Chavez supporters took back VTV and the presidential palace, regular broadcasts returned, and the president was back in power. In September 2012, a North Carolina family was watching Lilo and Stitch on their TV when something completely unexpected happened. About a minute into the movie, the picture pixelated, and for around 6 minutes the movie disappeared, replaced with much more adult footage before normal programming returned. The mom, Georgie Brown, says she first heard sounds coming from the living room that clearly did not belong in a family cartoon. When she ran in, they were terrified, one screaming and covering his ears, another in tears. Brown had recorded the movie a few days earlier and played it back for her 3 children. They hadn't touched the remote or changed the channel. Instead, the 6 minutes of adult material appeared right in the middle of her recorded movie, between messages saying part of the program was lost due to signal issues. A Dish Network contractor who looked at Brown's receiver said he'd never seen anything like it in his 15 years in the TV business. And Dish said they were taking the incident seriously and investigating what went wrong. On October 8, 2022, something shocking happened during a live news broadcast on Iran's state-run television. In the middle of the program, the feed suddenly cut away to a masked figure, then to a black screen showing a politician surrounded by flames, with a digital target placed directly over his head. This lasted for about 12 seconds. The screen also displayed photos of 4 women who'd recently died during protests. Alongside the image was the phrase "Woman, Life, Freedom," repeated multiple times. The group responsible for the interruption identified themselves as Adalat Ali, a hacktivist collective already known for leaking internal Iranian government documents before this incident. Clips of the hijacking spread almost instantly, both inside and outside Iran. This next story is a first-hand account from a now-deleted Reddit user who wrote, "This has bugged me for years, and I'm honestly starting to wonder if I somehow imagined it. I grew up in southern Ohio, near the Cincinnati area, and this would have been sometime around 2003 or 2004. I was maybe 12 or 13. It was a school night, probably around 9 or 10 p.m., and I was watching TV alone in my room. I don't remember the exact channel. It might have been a local station or basic cable. I know it wasn't a premium channel. I wasn't really paying attention much to what was on. I usually use the TV to fall asleep. But I noticed when this happened. Out of nowhere, the show cut to a black screen, then this grainy video fades in. It looked like security camera footage or maybe a camcorder pointed at a TV. There was a man sitting in a chair, facing away from the camera. You couldn't see his face. He just sat there while this low humming noise played. After maybe 20 or 30 seconds, he slowly turned his head toward the camera, but the video cut out before you could really see him. Then the screen went blue for a second and the normal show came back on, like usual. The next morning, I kind of wondered if I'd just been half asleep and dreamt the thing, but when I mentioned it to a couple friends the next day at school, 2 other kids say that they saw the same thing. One lived a few streets over, another was in a different part of town. We asked our parents, but they either didn't believe us or hadn't seen it. I've searched for this on and off for years. Reddit, forums, old TV hijack lists. I've never found anything even close. If anyone else remembers something like this in Ohio around the early 2000s, please tell me I'm not losing it.
Jesus Christ, help us all, Lord. Jesus Christ, help us all, Lord. Jesus Christ, help us all, Lord.
On January 3rd, 2007, viewers in Australia were watching a Canadian show called Mayday. Partway through the episode, a clear male voice with an American accent cut in, saying what you just heard. Jesus Christ, help us all, Lord. The line kept repeating over and over while the show continued, looping for about 6 minutes before it finally stopped. The channel came out later saying nothing illegal had happened. A network spokesperson claimed the audio was part of the original program. People were still super confused, of course. This just seemed like a very weak excuse. So some independent researchers looked into it and they figured it out. Turned out the voice came from a recorded news broadcast during the Iraq War. filmed on September 20th, 2005, showing a civilian truck being ambushed. How that audio ended up on an episode of a totally unrelated show 2 years later, though, that's never been explained. On March 11th, 2016, people in Israel watching Big Brother on Channel 2 got a jarring surprise. For about 3.5 minutes, the broadcast was taken over by Hamas. Viewers with private satellite dishes saw images from past attacks, funeral footage, and messages in Hebrew and Arabic saying things like, "Learn from history and the story is not over." Not everyone was affected. Homes using regular cable or major satellite providers didn't see it. Almost at the same time, though, rockets were fired from Gaza into southern Israel, though luckily no one was hurt. The timing seemed to suggest, though, that the TV takeover and the attacks were connected. Israeli authorities quickly traced this back to Hamas, and the incident made headlines around the country. On April 20th, 2012, viewers in and around Hamilton, Ontario, watching News Now AM, were met with 3 minutes of, you guessed it, an adult film. This really seems to happen a lot, doesn't it? The station's news director said the issue happened because of a mix-up at one of the cable companies. Cable lines had been cut the night before, and while crews were repairing them that morning, the wrong programming was somehow spliced into the cable feed that carried the channel's signal to subscribers. In early March 2022, as Russia's invasion of Ukraine entered its second week, the collective of hackers known as Anonymous claimed that they breached a bunch of Russian state-run TV channels, streaming services, and interrupted their broadcasts, with footage showing the impacts of the war. Russia 24, Channel 1, Moscow 24, and streaming platforms like Wink and Ivy were affected. Instead of the official state news feed, viewers saw clips of the conflict in Ukraine, along with messages in support of ending the war. In some of the footage, ending text claimed that ordinary Russians were against the war and urged opposition to the invasion. Anonymous had publicly declared it was in a kind of digital offensive against the Russian government after the invasion started. On the evening of April 8, 2015, something big went down at French broadcaster TV5 Monde. The main TV signal, all 12 of its channels, went black while the network was celebrating the launch of a new channel. Screens went totally dark, and the station's websites and social accounts were taken over as well. Yves Bigot, the director general, later said it was the worst thing that can happen to you in television. At first, posts and messages claiming responsibility came from a group calling itself Cyber Caliphate. The broadcaster's Facebook page was defaced, and the hackers posted threats like, "The Cyber Caliphate continues its cyber jihad against the enemies of Islamic State." Inside the network, things were a mess. Signals stayed down for hours, staff couldn't use email, and TV5 had to broadcast only pre-recorded programs. One of the technicians on site finally isolated the infected machine by unplugging it, and the channel started coming back on early the next morning. The hackers had broken into TV5 Monde systems months earlier, learned how their broadcast setups worked, and then created custom software to cripple their network. And it turned out that it was a well-known Russian hacking group known as APT28, rather than the original claim of Islamic State hackers. But why TV5 was targeted is still unclear, but the attack took TV5 offline for over 18 hours and cost millions in repairs and security upgrades. On the evening of July 29, 2025, something weird happened during a live broadcast from Brazilian channel Record News on YouTube. The live feed abruptly stopped showing the news and was replaced with a low-resolution video full of distorted visuals and odd noises, along with cryptic messages and phrases like, "You will see such pretty things. Why do you hate? And you are ill." It looked like some sort of mind control message you'd see in a movie. The interruption lasted about 3 minutes. Record News confirmed the issue only affected the YouTube stream. The regular TV broadcast and pay TV signals were not impacted here, but those phrases were the same lines found in a well-known internet creepypasta called the Wyoming Incident, a creepy fictional broadcast intrusion that's been circulating online since at least 2006. This clip comes from a live broadcast of London Tonight. A strange, dark, shadowy shape can be seen floating by the road behind the reporter. It has a very vague shape, but almost looks like it could be a person crossing the road. Now, on its own, this probably wouldn't be a big deal, but it's the circumstances surrounding it that really got this clip so much attention. And it has a lot of attention, millions and millions millions of views. The reporter was covering a deadly car accident that had taken place on this stretch of road not long before, so viewers started to wonder if this mysterious shape was some sort of ghostly presence, possibly the spirit of one of the victims of the accident, trying to leave the scene of the crash. Back in 2013, Wesh News in Daytona Beach, Florida covered a story about the historic Plaza Resort and Spa. Strange stuff had been going on there. Some of the eerie activity was caught on security cameras. They spoke to the hotel security chief at the time, who said he was watching the security monitors like usual one night when he caught something strange in the bar.
An apparition moving about, changing sizes, and when a guard came down to check, others say the ghostly presence seemed to hide.
The guard couldn't see what the rest of the staff spotted on the security camera, but he felt something.
The guy upstairs was telling him, go behind the bar, it's behind the bar, go behind. So he started to go behind the bar, and he said, no way.
This is one of the most frightening examples of how a small mistake can lead to a massive disaster. In 2003, a rock band called Great White was performing at a small club in Rhode Island. As part of their opening, they used gerbs, which are small fireworks that shoot sparks into the air. The club had covered the walls in cheap acoustic foam to keep the noise down, though, and that foam was highly flammable. So within seconds, the sparks ignited the walls. At first, the crowd thought that the flames were just part of the show, but it only took about 30 seconds for them to realize the building was actually on fire. Everyone rushed to the front door at the same time, creating a bottleneck. The club became a smoke-filled trap in less than 2 minutes. 100 people didn't make it out, and this entire sequence of events was captured on camera. It is not an easy watch, but it does go to show just how dangerous these situations are, how easily fires can become deadly, especially in crowded places. In 1989, during a big soccer game in England, a massive number of fans were trying to get into the stadium all at once. To ease the pressure at the turnstiles, a police officer ordered a large exit gate to be opened. This allowed thousands of people to pour into a tunnel that led directly to two already overcrowded pens, which were fenced-in areas for standing fans. The people entering the tunnel had no idea the area was full, so they kept pushing forward. The fans at the very front were crushed against the high steel fences that were meant to keep them off the field. Because the game had already started, the noise of the crowd drowned out the screams, drowned out all the screaming for help. It took several minutes for security to realize that people were being crushed. 97 people died in the end. For years, the authorities tried to blame the fans for what happened, but a long investigation eventually proved that, well, this was just actually a massive failure in stadium safety. There's one thing I've learned doing this list, though. I'm never going to a soccer match, I don't think, especially not in Europe. The national championship air races in Nevada are famous for planes flying at high speeds just a few dozen feet above the ground. Well, in 2011, a highly modified vintage fighter plane called the Galloping Ghost was competing. As the pilot, 74-year-old Jimmy Leeward, rounded a turn, a small piece of the tail broke off. This caused the plane to experience an incredible amount of G-force, which likely knocked the pilot unconscious. The plane pitched up, then dove straight down, traveling at over 400 miles per hour. It slammed directly into the concrete in front of the VIP grandstands. Because of the speed, there was no explosion. The plane basically disintegrated on impact, sending shrapnel through the seating area. 11 people were killed, including the pilot, of course. Now, there is footage of this, and it is absolutely terrifying to watch just how fast this happened. Nobody had time to even duck. It happened in an instant. In 2021, an Australian news presenter named Yvonne Young was in the middle of covering a story about a police dog that had been attacked in Brisbane, along with a segment on new legislation, when something strange happened during the broadcast. So right in the middle of the report, the feed suddenly cuts to a completely unrelated clip. One moment it's a standard news segment with officials in suits, and then out of nowhere, a satanic ritual. The newscaster just pauses for a brief moment, trying to process what you just saw, but then no acknowledgement. She just continues reading, keeping everything together and moving on with the segment. As for where that ritual footage came from, nobody knows. And this is probably one of my favorite videos on the internet. During this live broadcast in Finland, I believe, this man expertly avoided throwing up on air. Well, technically he did throw up, he just kept himself composed enough to make it as minimally embarrassing as possible. Take a look. I mean, what a hero. We've all burped and had a little bit of liquid come up and had to swallow it, but I mean, that was not a little bit. That was clearly a struggle. Could tell that he knew this was coming the entire time too. He was fighting it as long as he could. Just a few seconds on the clock and he hold it, no. And then... I mean, I haven't seen a save like that ever. If I'm barfing, it's coming out with force. Ursula Heger, a journalist for Channel 10 in Australia, was mid-broadcast doing a fairly standard live report. She was covering a story about an Australian sports figure who'd been accused of harassing a police officer. Well, partway through explaining the details, something completely unexpected really broke the flow. A small bird suddenly swooped down from off camera. At first, it just flew close, but it kept coming back in and repeatedly smacked her in the head. Ursula tried to keep talking through it, clearly fighting to stay focused, but it just kept happening over and over. It looked purposeful, honestly. This bird clearly had some kind of vendetta against this reporter. At one point, she actually crouches down, trying to get out of its flight path, but that really doesn't work either. The bird just flies down lower. It gets to the point where the bird hooks its feet into her hair, tangling itself in while flapping its wings against her head. She does manage to keep going for a bit, but it's obvious she's struggling not to break. Eventually, she loses the battle and then just starts laughing. Luckily, we don't film our videos outside here because I have a hard time getting through these videos without birds flapping in my face. Here's another fun one. This happened a few years ago. Alabama politician Kay Ivey was in the middle of this news conference when this happened.
We're getting a slight increase in the number of doses that we'll be getting to the state.
I've watched this video like 100 times and it never gets old.
We're getting a slight increase.
Listen to that.
We're getting a slight increase.
It's so wet and just meaty. That came from like the guts. Oh, I mean, to call that a burp is a grave injustice. That is a belch. And then she just continues on like nothing happened just there. I mean, if I'm in this situation, right, I'm on live TV, I'm on the news, and I let this deep guttural eruption out, I'm gonna have to give it some acknowledgement. I mean, make a casual joke, you know, address it on some level. I mean, this?
We're getting a slight increase.
That is not something that we just brush past. I mean, how everyone in the background didn't just erupt into laughter is insane too. I mean, that's the unexplained part. During a live morning broadcast in Honduras, journalist Carlos Molina was on air with co-host Pablo Zapata. They were just reading viewer messages at the desk. Pretty standard TV morning show stuff. Then mid-sentence, Carlos just stops. It's right in front of him. A glass of water on the table starts sliding across on its own. Not a tiny shake either. It actually moves clearly enough that both presenters, they notice it. And after the segment hit the air, the clip started getting shared around online, and Carlos said that something strange actually happened before the glass even moved. He described feeling a sudden chill run through his body right before it started sliding. He also made it clear nobody on the crew was messing around. Of course, glasses will sometimes slide when there's condensation underneath, but that doesn't appear to be the case here. The movement looks a lot more purposeful. It's not a subtle little slide, but what do you all think of this one? Sir Victor Goddard was a high-ranking pilot in the British Air Force. In 1935, he was flying over an old abandoned airfield in Scotland called Drem. The place was a ruin. The hangars were falling apart and the landing strips were covered in tall grass and grazing cows. After passing over it, he flew into a strange yellow cloud. The wind picked up and he felt like he was losing control of his plane. When he flew out on the other side of the cloud, he looked down at the airfield again and suddenly thought that he was losing his mind. The airfield had changed. It now somehow looked brand new. The hangars were repaired and there were 4 planes sitting on the tarmac painted bright yellow. He also saw mechanics moving around in blue jumpsuits. This was strange because in 1935, the Air Force painted their planes silver. The mechanics wore tan uniforms. Goddard flew home and told his friends, but they had no idea what to make of his crazy story and pretty much just brushed him off. Well, 4 years later, in 1939, the Air Force decided to reopen Drem. They started painting their training planes yellow and changed the mechanics' uniforms to blue, and that's when Goddard realized he hadn't just been losing it. For whatever reason, he'd managed to briefly glimpse the future. Either that or his story got around and the Air Force decided to reopen Drem and paint the planes yellow as an elaborate prank on the guy, but I highly doubt that was the case, as hilarious as that would be. In 2006, police in Kiev, Ukraine stopped a man who looked extremely out of place. He was wearing an old-fashioned suit and carrying an antique camera. When they asked for his ID, he handed them a document issued by the Soviet Union in 1958. He identified himself as Sergei Ponomarenko and seemed genuinely confused by why the buildings around him looked so modern and why everyone was carrying what he referred to as small glass rectangles in their hands. The police thought he was mentally ill and took him to a clinic. The doctor there asked to develop the film in Sergei's camera, and when they did, they found that the photos showed Kiev exactly as it looked, but in the 1950s, including a photo of a guy who looked a lot like Sergei with a woman. There was also a photo of a strange bell-shaped object floating in the sky. While the film was being processed, Sergei vanished from his locked room at the clinic, which was also guarded by security. The police eventually found the woman from the photo, who was now in her 70s. She confirmed that Sergei had been her boyfriend, but that he disappeared in 1958 after going out to take photos of a strange object that he saw in the sky. This next story comes from Reddit user Mothi187, who said they came home from the grocery store and started unloading bags into their second-floor apartment. At one point, they specifically remembered taking out a pound of hamburger meat out of one of the bags and placing it on the counter. They then went back outside to grab the rest of the groceries from the car. When they came back, inside the hamburger meat was gone. The narrator said they lived alone, had no pets, there were no open windows. The apartment was also laid out in a way where nobody could have entered or left without having been noticed. At first they thought maybe they imagined buying it, but after checking the receipt, hamburger meat was listed there. Mothi187 said it never showed up again. They eventually had to go back to the store and just buy another package. Reddit user Routineplant8549 shared a bizarre story that happened to their sister while she was alone at work, and to this day, nobody's been able to explain it. During the sister's lunch break, she went upstairs to the office kitchen to heat up some food in the microwave. While waiting, she cleaned her coffee mug and specifically remembered the sink being completely empty afterward. There were no dishes, utensils, or random items left behind. She then went back downstairs to eat at her desk and continue working. Short time later, she returned to the kitchen to clean up after lunch, but the second she looked at the sink, something immediately caught her attention. Sitting right in the middle of it was a small clear plastic bag that definitely hadn't been there before. Curious, she picked it up and was stunned to see 2 passport-sized photos of her son inside. The photos were several years old and had originally been taken for a school application. The photo package came with 4 copies in total. 1 had been used for the application, while the remaining 3 were stored together in that exact plastic bag, but inside a box at home along with other important school documents. When the sister got home later that day, she checked that box. Somehow, only 1 photo was still inside. The other 2 ended up at her office somehow, and nobody knew how the hell those pictures could have possibly ended up in her office kitchen sink. That is creepy. In 1979, 2 couples were driving through France on their way to Spain. They were looking for a place to stay and found a very old-timey hotel. The windows had heavy wooden shutters and no glass, and the staff all wore clothing from a bygone era, it looked like. The rooms were incredibly cheap, too. They had a meal, stayed the night, and took photos of themselves standing in front of the building. On their return trip, they decided to stay at the same hotel again because it was so charming, but they couldn't find it. They drove up and down the same stretch of road a couple times, but it wasn't there. They asked locals for directions, but no one had ever heard of a hotel in that area. When they got their film developed, the photos they took at the hotel were missing, even though the photos taken before and after the stay came out perfectly. The couples later found out that the uniforms they described were from a style of dress that hadn't been used in France for over 100 years. It was as if some old hotel had temporarily materialized into reality for one night and then vanished. Le Mans is the most famous endurance race in the world, but in 1955 it became the site of a disaster that changed racing forever. Early in the race, a driver named Mike Hawthorne slowed down suddenly to enter the pits. This caused a chain reaction behind him. Another driver, Pierre Levey, was traveling at 150 miles per hour and had nowhere to go. His car hit the back of a slower vehicle, which acted like a ramp, launching him directly into the air toward the spectator stands. The car didn't just crash, it basically disintegrated. The heavy engine block, the radiator, and the hood flew through the air like projectiles, cutting through the crowd, burst into white-hot flames that were almost impossible for firefighters to put out with water. 83 people lost their lives that day. The most unsettling part of the story is that the race organizers decided not to stop the event. While bodies were being carried away, the remaining drivers continued to lap the track for another 12 hours. But they weren't being heartless. If they stopped the race, all the people leaving the venue at once would have clogged the roads, preventing ambulances from reaching the victims. The Walendas were, and still are, circus royalty, famous for performing incredibly dangerous stunts without a safety net. Their 7-person chair pyramid was their most legendary act. It involved 4 men on the wire, 2 men on the level above them, and a woman at the very top sitting in a chair. During a performance at the Shrine Circus in Detroit in 1962, the group was in the middle of their act when the lead man on the wire suddenly lost his balance. The pole slipped and the entire pyramid collapsed in an instant. Thousands of families watched as the performers plummeted toward the concrete floor. 2 members of the family died on impact, and another was paralyzed from the waist down. The woman at the very top, Jenna Walenda, managed to grab the wire as she fell and was caught by circus staff below. Even though the arena was filled with screaming and panic, the circus band was instructed to keep playing to try and calm the crowd. In the move that many found hard to believe, the surviving members of the family were back on the high wire, performing again the very next evening. It's old school, show must go on mentality. The marathon at the 1904 St. Louis Olympics has to be one of the most insane, disastrous sporting events in history. It was held in 90-degree heat on roads that were thick with dust. And to make matters worse, the organizers only provided 2 water stops for the entire 26-mile course because they wanted to see how it would affect the runners. It was basically an experiment. Well, as you can imagine, the result was pure chaos, but it wasn't even entirely to do with dehydration. One runner was chased a mile off the course by a pack of wild dogs. Another runner nearly lost his life because the dust he inhaled caused his stomach lining to tear. The man who crossed the finish line first, Fred Loers, actually cheated by riding in a car for 11 miles. So the real winner, a man named Thomas Hicks, well, he somehow managed to make it, with his trainers feeding him a mixture of egg whites, brandy, and a type of rat poison. At the time, they thought small doses of it acted as a stimulant. By the final miles, Hicks was hallucinating. His skin had turned gray, and he had to be physically carried over the finish line by his team. He lost 8 pounds during the race and nearly died in the medical tent afterward. Good God, somebody needs to make a movie about this. In the early 90s, Monica Seles was the top female tennis player in the world. During a match in Germany in 1993, she was sitting on a bench during a break between games, wiping her face with a towel. The crowd was quiet, they were just waiting for the next set to start. A graphic showed up on screen with the score for people watching at home, like usual, and then suddenly a scream ran out. A man named Gunter Parch had run down from the stands. Before anyone could react, he plunged a 9-inch blade into Seles's back between her shoulder blades. The stadium went from dead silent to absolute panic as security tackled the man. Seles stood up, clutching her back, and then collapsed into the arms of the staff. Turns out the attacker was not really a random person. He was an obsessed fan of Seles's rival, Steffi Graf. Apparently, he didn't want to end her life, he just wanted to hurt her so she couldn't play tennis anymore, allowing Graf to become #1 again. Even though the wound healed in a few weeks, the mental impact lasted for years. Seles didn't return to professional tennis for 2 years, and the event forced every major sport to completely change how they handle security around athletes during live events. In 1964, during a high-stakes soccer match in Peru, a massive crowd gathered to watch their team play Argentina. Near the end of the game, the referee made a call that the local fans hated, and 2 people hopped the fence to run onto the field. The police on the scene beat the fans in front of everyone, and this caused the rest of the stadium to erupt in anger. To try and control the situation, the police fired tear gas into the stands, and that was a big mistake. The gas caused thousands of people to just panic and rush toward the exit gates to escape the fumes. Problem was, the steel gates at the bottom of the tunnels were locked. Because the people at the back of the crowd couldn't see what was happening at the front, they just kept pushing forward, and over 300 people were crushed, suffocated against the locked doors. Outside the stadium, the rioting grew so intense, the government had to declare a state of emergency. It remains the deadliest day in the history of the sport. In March 2015, Coco 5 News in Oklahoma City was doing a pretty standard early morning traffic segment when their Skycam captured something flashing across the screen. A bright white object suddenly streaks through the frame at insane speed. The anchors didn't react in real time because it happened so fast, but viewers noticed it immediately. And once the footage got out, people started flooding the station asking what they just saw, and Coco took it seriously. They replayed the clip and then posted it online asking viewers to help figure out what it could be. It's too fast and too straight to be a plane. It doesn't match drone movement either, and it doesn't really drop like a meteor would. It cuts across the frame more like it's traveling sideways at a steady height. People also ruled out simple camera bugs or something on the lens because the light appears to pass behind distant clouds instead of just sitting on the glass. It also didn't line up with any known aircraft activity or scheduled flights in the area at the time. This one comes from a Reddit user named Amputee Hand Model, responding to a thread about strange broadcast interruptions. They wrote, "A somewhat odd one I witnessed 20 years ago or so. One of those emergency broadcast tests came on TV, but instead of the usual audio with the test warning script, it just played Pour Some Sugar on Me by Def Leppard. I gotta wonder what the emergency was, because, hopefully it wasn't serious. Anyone actually waiting for instructions on what to do was out of luck that day." In 2010, a Jamaican news station covered a story about a young boy who said he was being haunted by something called a duppy, which is basically a local word for a ghost. The crew records him talking about it while sitting in a chair, describing strange experiences and the feeling of some ominous presence around him. Suddenly, he gets pulled backward in his chair. Doesn't look like a slip or, him pushing off the ground. He goes back fast. Something yanks him out of position. Later in the segment, things escalate again. He says he can actually see the spirit standing nearby, watching him. Right after that, he gets pulled backward again, similar to before, still fully in frame while it happens. And look how his body moves. One of his legs lifts into the air as he's sliding backward. Then when his mother rushes in and grabs him, his leg twists as she pulls him forward, like there's resistance or something interfering with his movement, even though you can't actually see anything on camera. It's a pretty crazy video. In April of 2020, during the early lockdowns, Pope Francis appeared at a window overlooking St. Peter's Square in Vatican City to give a blessing. It was part of a live broadcast. He steps out, acknowledges the crowd, delivers the blessing, and then turns to head back inside. But this clip ended up going viral, and not for the reason that you're probably thinking. Some viewers noticed that as he walked away from the window, he suddenly just disappeared. One moment he was there, the next frame he was gone. The clip started circulating online with people claiming that he disappeared into thin air during the live broadcast. In 2019, 9 News Australia did a story on a pub called Tyler's Kiln. The owner, Alistair Collins, is pretty convinced his place is haunted, and he had a bunch of late-night security footage to back it up. Chairs sliding out from tables on their own, umbrellas randomly popping open when nobody was around, doors slamming shut. One of the news anchors actually tried to recreate the chair moving the way it did in the footage, and he couldn't replicate it.
But this skeptic still isn't convinced.
Have a go.
See if we can see if I can
dragging
get a
it
ghost.
and try and make it smooth.
The ground was just too uneven to smoothly drag the chair like it was dragged in the CCTV footage. And rigging out some kind of string trick would have been really hard to hide on camera. They also looked into how the umbrella could have opened by itself and basically concluded it'd be nearly impossible to do without someone ending up in the shot. The creepiest part of the whole story comes from an electrician who was doing renovations. He heard these small doors swinging near the kitchen and then loud footsteps going up the stairs. So he assumed it was the other guy in the building heading up, but then that guy came walking straight out of the kitchen right in front of him. So they went upstairs together to check it out. Who was up there? Well, there was nobody. The entire top floor was empty. During a live weather broadcast in Argentina back in 2023, something unexpected happened. Matthias Bertolotti was mid-forecast, and the production cut to one of their outdoor cameras. A live feed pointed at a quiet boardwalk. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary at first glance, but then a viewer watching from home noticed something strange. Running across the grass was what appeared to be a human figure, except there was something very strange about it. The figure was not solid. It was semi-transparent, ghostly pale, and you can barely make out any legs. It's like you're looking at the top half of a person. And to top it off, the figure seems to vanish out of thin air. The production team replayed the clip after viewers began calling in about it. Both hosts were pretty shocked. They were adamant that there had been no tampering with the footage. The camera had been rolling live the entire time.
list, we have Mayday. I don't know if you guys have ever seen the show Mayday, but it's one of those disaster reenactment shows where something goes terribly wrong and they interview the people that it happened to. It's the kind of stuff you see on the Discovery Channel now that they don't have any shows about science. But this was being shown in Australia on the 7 network back in 2007. That seems like a lifetime ago now. But the show was doing its regular thing, talking about planes falling out of the sky, and then out of nowhere an audio recording just changed the entire tone. It was someone saying over and over, "Jesus Christ, help us, Lord." Now, when you're watching a show about plane crashes, you can imagine that this might be seen as something that was supposed to be there. But this was on repeat for 6 minutes. One of the weirdest parts about this was that it was all in a southern accent. And on top of that, once the story hit the news and everyone was talking about how weird this was, and the video was uploaded to the internet, the network denied that it ever happened. They said that the audio was part of the original broadcast. Like, what are you talking about? There's a 6-minute chunk of someone calling out for help from Jesus. Next on the list, we have God's opinion on Playboy. I don't think that the Lord and Savior would be very happy about people watching the Playboy channel. Well, there was a Christian man who certainly thought so, and he wanted all the people watching to know. This was back in 1987 when the Playboy channel was interrupted by a broadcast that was screaming Bible verses about how they're sinners and God is watching and blah blah blah. You guys know how it always goes. The man responsible for this was Thomas Haney, who worked for the Christian Broadcasting Network. He would be arrested for this 3 years later. Next on the list, we have The Old Couple. This one is shrouded in a field of mystery. To this day, no one knows what went down with this hijacking. For this story, we're going to have to shoot back to the year 2007. Everyone at home was watching some regular cable television, and then something insane came in and shocked all of them. It was a still image of 2 faces. Now that doesn't seem insane, but it was the mood that the faces set. Neither one of these faces were real people. They both looked like they had been made in some sort of software. One of them had a big happy grin on its face, and the other one was a frowning creepy face, almost like they were representations of theater, comedy, and tragedy. This image stayed on the screen for a while. There was 0 sound that came along with it, and then it was gone. To this day, no one knows what the hell it meant or why they were there. Some people think that it was a dark omen, but the network says that it was just a scheduling error, and the image was actually from an ad that was supposed to play later. Next on the list, guys, we have Captain Midnight. Not everyone who is going to take over a broadcast is going to do so just for a strange spanking session or to yell out religious incantations that don't really make any sense. Now, some people are going to do it for a noble cause. Well, in their mind, it's probably a noble cause. Captain Midnight, also known as John R. McDougal, that's his real name, was a man who used his understanding of satellite networks to send out a message to everyone who was watching HBO back in the 80s. This, of course, happened close to midnight. Well, it was closer to 12:30, but you get what he was going for. The broadcast interruption that he sent out was chastising HBO for their high prices. Their price scheme was affecting his satellite business, and he had to get a second job, so he wanted to protest, and it was a pretty famous protest. He might have gotten away with it if he wasn't such a blabbermouth. The dude was eventually caught because someone heard him bragging about the whole thing at a bar, but on the bright side, he didn't have any jail time, just had to pay a fine and then was put on probation.
What you're seeing here is news coverage in Laos of a mysterious phenomenon known as the Naga fireballs. Every year in late October, crowds gather along the Mekong River in Thailand to watch red balls of light float up from the water and then vanish into the night sky. They're called Naga fireballs, and locals say they're caused by a giant serpent spirit that lives in the river. The orbs don't make any noise, they come out of nowhere and they rise fast, sometimes hundreds in one night. There's been a lot of debate about what's really going on here. A Thai documentary once claimed it was just tracer rounds being fired by soldiers across the river in Laos. Others have blamed flare guns or some kind of flammable gas bubbling up from the riverbed, like methane or phosphine, but none of those explanations totally hold up. The balls don't behave like flares, and scientists pointed out that the conditions needed for gas bubbles to ignite like that don't really line up. In 2021, during a strict curfew, officials made sure there were no people out with flares, and the fireballs still showed up. This footage was taken in downtown Milwaukee in 2018 during a live broadcast. The news anchors had no idea what they were looking at. Fireworks? Aliens? They joked. It's very strange. This doesn't even look like your typical UAP footage. These things aren't moving in any sort of recognizable pattern. They're just floating in every which direction. They almost look like ghosts zipping through the air than any artificial object. And there are so many of them. It's really cool, but if I saw this in person, I'd be pretty unsettled. What do you all think of this one? If someone can enlighten me as to what this could be, please share your thoughts down below. This next one comes from a 2017 episode of the British talk show This Morning, featuring a couple and their possessed doll. The chair it sat on started to rock on its own several times throughout the interview.
That chair's beginning to rock. Look at that. Who's doing that? Stop it.
The owner said that she and her husband had been walking by an antique store when they spotted a few old-looking dolls. The couple decided to buy a few of them because they were cheap and figured they might be able to flip them for more. Well, as soon as the dolls came home with them, strange things started to happen. They had one doll, the one they brought to the TV studio, sitting on the dresser in their room. Well, one morning the husband got up, hopped in the shower, and then suddenly felt this burning sensation on his leg.
And I looked down and there was a lot of scratches all over my knee.
They put the doll in their shed inside a plastic bin. Well, a couple days later, the wife went in and opened the bin, only to find that somehow the doll's necklace had been removed, even though it had been wrapped up tightly on the doll initially. And that night she woke up at 2 a.m. hearing this whooshing noise moving past the bed, almost like the rustling of clothing, or more specifically, a dress. There was nothing there. They ended up selling the doll. Did Pope Francis vanish into thin air on live TV? This was filmed back in April of 2020. The Pope showed up at the window above St. Peter's Square to bless people affected by the pandemic. Then he turned around and walked back inside, only before he was out of camera range, he suddenly just vanishes. You don't see him slowly disappear into the shadows. He's just there 1 second, then he's not. It's pretty bizarre. It's hard to find the original news segment online too, because it was taken down for some reason. In 2010, a Jamaican news station covered a story about a boy who claimed that he was being haunted by a duppy, basically a ghost. And the news team captured two strange incidents on camera. First, the boy is sitting in a chair talking about the strange experiences when all of a sudden he flies backward, as if something is pulling him. Then later in the segment, the boy claims to see the spirit standing close by watching him, and then he gets pulled again. At least that's what it looks like. Now, notice how one of his legs is in the air as he continues to move backward. And then when his mom grabs him, his legs like flip around like they're being grabbed at by someone, only we can't actually see anyone. It could be faked, but it is a damn good performance by this kid if it is. Alright, so at first glance, this just looks like some streaker running around a soccer field. If you're watching casually, you might even laugh it off, but the longer you watch, the weirder this footage is. This figure shows up from multiple camera angles, dashing through the crowd and along the edge of the field, and nobody reacts, like at all. No one turns their head, no one flinches, it's like they don't even see it. Then you notice this thing doesn't look fully solid, it's kind of see-through. There's a moment where it looks like it passes right through a group of people. Plus, this person actually ends up on the field, and if you know anything about stadium security, you know the second someone who's not meant to be there steps foot on the grass, they're getting tackled and dragged off. But here, nothing happens. Well, with all that said, I've been your host James, and I'll catch you, yes you specifically, in the next video.
Next on the list, we have the zombies are here. I don't know if you guys are into zombies taking over the earth, but when I think about it, I kind of get excited. Like, if the zombies come and we all have to go into full apocalypse mode, then it resets a lot of stuff back at zero. Who cares how much money you have? The new currency is food, water, and bullets. But people in Montana might have thought that the end of the world was coming via zombie takeover, and it was sent out to the perfect group of people watching the Steve Wilkos show. You know, the folks that are hanging out watching daytime TV are the ones who would be most excited about the end of the world coming. But during an episode of the Steve Wilkos show in 2013, there was a warning that went across the screen and warned the people that the dead were coming back to life and attacking the living. Of course, this was fake. I think if there's anywhere in the world where the dead are going to come back to life, it's not going to be in Montana. Usually it would seem that these things happen because of some advanced science going awry, and I don't think there's any high-tech happenings going on over there. Next on the list, guys, we have the Wyoming hijacking. I think we have gotten to the point where you can't hijack a signal anymore unless you have some of the best tech on the market, and even if you did, you would probably get caught pretty fast. But back in the day, you could get away with it easy peasy. The Wyoming incident is one of the weirdest ever. It was a hijacking of a news broadcast after the 2008 election. Seems like a pretty good time to steal the news. There would have been so many people watching. The broadcast was just some black and white bars across the screen and a series of words that popped up. It closed out with some very strange images of heads that seemed to be digitized. The messages were creepy, claiming that people will see beautiful things and that some of the people will become sick. And the messages all used the statement "we" as if there was a group of people who were sending out these messages. The whole thing was very strange and never explained, and there were rumors that some of the people who watched the broadcast actually started to hallucinate. Next on the list, we have really nothing like a good old-fashioned message that came from outer space. That's what we really need on this channel. Well, this was for sure a message from a person, they just claimed that it was from space. The Vrillion incident lasted about 6 minutes and it took place in 1977. It was a voice that was able to commandeer the news at 5 a.m. and talk to the people watching and say that he was from space and that he was warning humanity that they needed to stop fighting, that they were too in love with war, and that if they didn't change their ways, that a force would come in and stop them. He also said that our constant fighting was causing us to miss out on the age of Aquarius, which was the next step in evolution. Next on the list, we have Kaluga. For this one, we're going to have to shoot over to Soviet Russia in the mid-60s. That must have been like Disneyland. I'm just joking. It was a very dark place and there were no jokes. But back then, there was something known as the Kaluga incident, which might have been one of the scariest things that ever happened during a TV hijacking. This happened in the city of Kaluga. Everyone was chilling, watching TV, and then out of nowhere, a message came on the screen that made everyone feel like they were about to die. The message said that the Americans had launched a rocket at the USSR, and these were in fact nuclear warheads. There was mass panic, but eventually everyone got the word that the message was a fake. The person responsible was an 18-year-old boy who was using a transmitter to hijack the signal. He was later arrested and had to make a public apology and swear that he would never broadcast anything ever again. And finally, guys, we have the Wenzhou protest. This is one of the crazier ones on this list because it wasn't just someone sending out a vague, unclear message or something creepy put on TV for an unknown reason. Back in 2014, in the town of Wenzhou, China, there was a very clear message that popped up on cable. It was a message speaking out against the communism in the Chinese government and a message telling people they should switch to a pro-democratic system. They used images of Tank Man from the Tiananmen Square to get these messages across, and the hijack was up for about 10 minutes. This was a short-lived moment. Now, as far as I know, the people who pulled off this stunt were never found. But there's one thing I know about China, and that's don't speak out against the government unless you want to go missing. So there is a chance that these people were found and just put in a hole so no one would ever find them ever again.
So in 1977, during a regular news broadcast in southern England, the audio suddenly cut out. The picture went all fuzzy, and there was this buzzing noise. Then a strange metallic voice cut in, claiming to be Vrilon from the Ashtar Galactic Command. And for nearly 6 minutes it delivered this bizarre message, warning humanity to stop fighting, destroy its weapons, and prepare for a great awakening. It also told viewers that they were being watched and guided by beings from other worlds. The station was completely unaware of what was going on until people started calling in. engineers figured out someone had hijacked the signal by targeting a specific transmitter that rebroadcast signals from another tower, basically exploiting a weak point in the system. But even still, they never found out who actually did this. Whoever it was, though, needed some serious technical skill and equipment. People have analyzed every part of this message. Some say it was just a prank, others think it was someone who genuinely wanted to put this message out there, and then there are those who actually think this message was coming from somewhere up in space. I'd love to believe that, but I don't. Back in March of 2015, Coco 5 News in Oklahoma City was running a normal early morning traffic report. Nothing exciting, just the usual aerial feed from their Grand Casino Skycam out in Shawnee. But then, out of nowhere, this glowing white object zipped across the screen at lightning speed. It was super fast, too fast to be a plane, and the movement doesn't look like a drone either. The news anchors didn't even notice it live. Viewers caught it first and started flooding the station with questions. To their credit, the news station didn't ignore it. They re-aired the footage and posted it online, asking the public to help figure out what it was. Problem is, nobody really could. It wasn't a meteor, those fall, they don't fly sideways at a steady height. It wasn't a bug on the lens either, the light shifts as it moves and you could see it behind distant clouds. It wasn't a military or commercial aircraft as far as anyone could tell, and it didn't match any scheduled flights. Despite being caught live on air and analyzed frame by frame, nobody's ever nailed down exactly what this thing was. Alright, this is of 2024. A local New York TV station was doing live helicopter coverage of traffic over the Hudson River. Same old stuff, until this strange glowing orb floats into the frame, hovering, changing color, then darting out of view. It starts out white and then turns blue and kind of semi-translucent before flying off. The anchor didn't react at the moment, but when the clip was shared online, people started talking about it. Some blamed lens flares, some guessed maybe it was a drone, others said a weather balloon, but the object didn't behave like any of those. It hovered, it changed color, then accelerated. Not even the FAA had an answer. Ending on a spooky note, in 2015, CNN reporter Katie Kairos and her cameraman Nick Petrillo went to a house in Hanover, Pennsylvania, to film a segment about a woman named Deanna Simpson who said that her home was haunted. Deanna claimed she'd been dealing with it for about 7 years. She said it wasn't just strange noises. According to her, she'd been attacked by whatever was in the house along with her husband and their pets. She also said she heard voices and screaming at night when nobody else was around. Well, while they were filming, things did start getting weird. Nick, the cameraman, suddenly said his hand felt like it was burning. When he checked it, there were fresh scratch marks on his wrist. Deanna didn't react like it was new information. She told him, "It's because you're telling the story. They don't want it out there. That's their way of a warning." And then she sprinkled holy water on him. Katie Kairos later said she also felt something during the filming, describing it like being touched and pinched while they were inside the house. At one point, they even caught small orb-like shapes on camera. And after Deanna asked whatever was there to show itself, a door reportedly slammed shut on its own. Deanna said she had recordings too, including what sounded like children laughing when the house was supposedly empty. What are we looking at here? Good question. This clip was posted to Reddit by user Steve90,000, who wrote that on December 13th, 2024 at 5 p.m., ABC News caught an orb on video when in New Jersey investigating the drone situation. At the time, tons of people were spotting UAPs over the state. So what you're looking at here is just one of them. As for what it actually was, we still don't know. On April 27, 1986, HBO viewers were watching The Falcon and the Snowman when their screens suddenly cut to black, and for about 5 minutes, a message appeared in bright white text on a color test pattern that read, "Good evening, HBO, from Captain Midnight. $12.95 a month? No way." The broadcast had been hijacked. The person behind it was John R. McDougall, a satellite engineer who was frustrated with HBO's pricing, which he felt was unfair to satellite dish owners who had to pay monthly fees for content that used to be free. McDougall later admitted that he'd used his own satellite equipment at a Florida transmission site to briefly override HBO's signal. He knew exactly how to aim his dish and transmit at just the right frequency to cut into their feed. Authorities launched an investigation, and within a few months, he was caught. He was fined and given probation, so yeah, the guy was identified, but I just had to bring this one up. The fact that this guy successfully interrupted one of the largest cable networks without immediate detection is pretty nuts. This is one of the most high-profile broadcast intrusions in US history. In 2021, Sam Hessler, a reporter for CBS 6, was doing a live morning segment from Greenbridge Cemetery in Saratoga County, New York. At the time, everything seemed perfectly normal. Nobody on set noticed anything unusual. It wasn't until later that day when a viewer contacted the station saying they'd seen something strange walking behind her during the broadcast. When the news team went back to review the footage, they spotted it too. Some sort of figure crossing the background. It almost looked like it appeared out of nowhere and disappeared just as quickly. The clip got passed around and people slowed it down to try and figure out what it was. In the slowed version, you can clearly see a shadowy form moving across the screen. Now, Greenridge Cemetery already has a bit of a spooky reputation. There have been stories of eerie things there over the years. You can imagine the details. Nothing super out of the ordinary for a cemetery. But to have something captured on live television like this, that hits a little different. The reptilian conspiracy is one of the more out there theories floating around, but somehow it's got a pretty big following, partly thanks to supposed footage of it. The idea is that some of the world's most powerful people, your politicians, singers, actors, that they're not actually human, that they're instead these shape-shifting reptilian creatures wearing human skin suits as a disguise while secretly pulling the strings behind all the world's biggest decisions. What's kept this conspiracy alive for so long is what some claim to be video evidence. Over the years, live TV has supposedly caught these lizard people slipping up. There are clips of news anchors and politicians where their pupils briefly look like vertical slits instead of round human eyes. Sometimes their faces seem to glitch, momentarily revealing what looks like snake-like patches of skin underneath. Plenty of people have slowed these clips down, zoomed in, and picked apart the footage frame by frame, and then posted top 10 lists online talking about it. Well, I gotta talk about it. I know it, you know it, but that's because this is the wildest live broadcast hack in history, the Max Headroom incident, still unsolved. On November 22nd, 1987, on the evening news on WGN in Chicago, the screen suddenly cut to a man wearing a Max Headroom mask, a character from a TV show around that time. The man didn't say anything at first, he just stood there as this background behind him was spinning around, making strange movements, and you also hear a bit of a buzzing noise. The station quickly cut the feed, got back to the news. It only lasted about 20 seconds, but that wasn't the end of it. Just 2 hours later, during a broadcast of Doctor Who on the local PBS station, the same masked man took over again, and this time he started talking, mumbling phrases that made no sense, mocking TV personalities, even getting spanked with a fly swatter by someone off camera. It's a mix of emotions watching this footage. It's undoubtedly eerie, but you can't say there isn't humor in this too. The whole thing lasted about 90 seconds before the station finally managed to cut him off. The Federal Communications Commission launched an investigation, but they never caught the person responsible. To this day, no one knows who did it or exactly how they pulled it off. Why even? Breaking into live broadcasts like this is not easy. It would have required a lot of knowledge and skill. It's considered one of the weirdest unsolved broadcast intrusions ever. In early 2002, cable TV viewers in several Chinese cities were suddenly interrupted by unexpected programming. It was a planned hijack by members of Falun Gong, a spiritual group that had been heavily suppressed by the Chinese government. The hijackers wanted to challenge the official version of a disturbing public event from the year before. They showed videos disputing state propaganda and calling for an end to persecution. Depending on the city, the hijack lasted anywhere from a few minutes to nearly an hour, and some reports even longer. These weren't digital hacks, they physically tapped into broadcasting equipment, which took some serious planning. A few months later, 15 people were arrested, and they were given very harsh prison sentences. In the years that followed, reports came out that several of those arrested had died while in custody. But those claims have been hard to verify because of how tightly China controls information. During the 2006 Lebanon War, Israel managed to break into Hezbollah's Al-Manar TV and broadcast their own message, a very direct threat aimed at Hezbollah's leader, Hassan Nasrallah. His face appeared on screen with crosshairs over it, followed by the sound of 3 loud pops and footage of Israeli airstrikes. It only lasted a few seconds, but the point was quite obviously not subtle. Fast forward to 2014 during the Gaza conflict, and this time the other side hijacked Israel's Channel 10 with a warning telling people to stay in their bomb shelters, mixed with graphic images from Gaza. Then again in 2016, people watching Big Brother on Israel's Channel 2 suddenly had their feed cut and replaced with another propaganda clip. That one lasted about 3.5 minutes, just long enough to get noticed before it was pulled. None of these takeovers were super polished, but they were meant to shake people up, not just jam the airwaves, but get into viewers' heads. When we're talking about broadcast interruptions that terrified the public, well, these are pretty much the textbook definition. In 1959, a few thousand people in Michigan were trying to watch the World Series when their screen just went black for the entire first 3 games. Turned out it wasn't a tech failure. A former station employee named Harold Lindgren had snuck into a relay station miles out of town and jammed the signal by shoving steel wool into a pipe in the transmitter. He'd been fired a few weeks earlier and wanted to get back at the boss who let him go. He called the whole thing a diabolical plot. And to be fair, it kind of was. He drove out at night, climbed a fence, sabotaged the equipment with stuff he'd just grabbed from his kitchen sink. Technicians from Chicago and Green Bay had been brought in to figure out what happened. When police finally tracked him down, Lindgren admitted to everything. He didn't really seem to care about hiding it, just wanted to make a point. In 1980, WSB-TV in Atlanta had a bizarre incident during a kids' cartoon block. Oh boy. The Plastic Man Comedy Adventure Show was on. Yeah, that show that we all remember. Well, right in the middle of a commercial break, the screen suddenly cut to a still photo of a woman for a couple seconds, nude. The image had been spliced into a Georgia Forestry Commission ad. It seemed like an accident, but apparently it wasn't. The station's general manager, Fred Barber, later admitted that 2 master control operators had done this on purpose. They were the guys who handled overnight sign-offs and morning startup duties. Apparently, one of them liked splicing random things onto tapes, and this time, no one on the station's morning staff caught it before it aired. The operators were fired immediately. Even though it was over in seconds, it caused a huge stir. Because, well, first of all, the time slot, worst time and place to show a naked woman on TV, and this was a major station. So the rules around tape handling and sign-on and sign-off procedures were tightened. On January 4th, 2000, the Teletubbies was playing on the GMA network in the Philippines. On this particular morning, for just a few seconds, the screen cut to a photo of actress Rosanna Rosas with her chest exposed. Teletubbies was weird enough as is. This was the last thing these young viewers needed to see. Obviously, this immediately triggered a warning from the country's media review board. GMA later explained that the whole thing was a mistake caused by an employee who was fixing a computer at the time. Apparently, he pressed the wrong button while trying to help with some system repairs, and somehow that caused the wrong image to flash on air. That sounds hard to believe. I mean, that really does sound like the excuse you give when you just don't know what to say. Oh, I pressed the wrong button, and then it was boobs. Anyway, they insisted nobody did this as a prank. The network apologized and promised to tighten up controls. The employee was never named. Wasn't much follow-up on whether he kept his job, but it's definitely freaked out parents and probably gave a few kids a weird memory of Teletubbies. They probably grew up thinking this was some bizarre fever dream. On October 8th, 2022, in the middle of a live newscast on Iran's state-run TV, the broadcast suddenly cut to a masked figure and a black screen showing Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei surrounded by flames, with a digital target on his head. It only lasted 12 seconds, but this was very loud and clear. The screen also showed photos of 4 women who had recently died during the Mahsa Amini protests, along with the phrase "Women, Life, Freedom," repeated over and over. Mahsa Amini was a 22-year-old woman who died after being arrested by Iran's morality police for supposedly not wearing her headscarf the right way. Her death quickly set off protests all across the country. The group behind this hack called themselves Adalat Ali, a hacktivist collective that had already leaked internal government documents in the past. State TV anchors were clearly rattled when the feed returned. I mean, just look at this news anchor's face. People inside and outside Iran shared clips of the hack almost immediately, and it spread fast online. No one really knows how deep the investigation went or if anyone got caught, but even though it was under 15 seconds, this was one of the most direct, high-profile hacks ever pulled off on live Iranian television. Now, for obvious reasons, I can't actually find footage of these Soviet pirate broadcasting hacks. I mean, it was the Soviet Union, everything was very locked down, but back in the Soviet Union, where the government completely controlled radio and TV, pirate broadcasting wasn't done as a prank. This was one of the only ways to hear anything outside what the government wanted you to hear. As early as 1966, there were reports of a teenager in Kaluga hijacking the radio to spread fake news about a nuclear war breaking out with the US. That kind of hoax was rare, but actual hijackers were popping up constantly, especially during the 70s and 80s. They'd jump onto relay stations during programming gaps and broadcast their own music, their own opinions. Sometimes the state would lash back in newspapers, calling them radio hooligans and accusing them of jamming frequencies needed by emergency aircraft. Whether that part was true or just scare tactics isn't totally clear. I imagine there was a lot of exaggeration going on. Oh, there are even hotlines for citizens to report pirate signals, but these underground broadcasters kept showing up, proving how desperate the people were for anything that wasn't just government propaganda. In 2005, ABC 13 Action News in Las Vegas covered a man named Ramon Watkins, who referred to himself as Prophet Yahweh. He claimed that he could summon UFOs just by praying, and said he would prove it live on camera. Well, ABC sent a reporter, Mike Dello Stritto, and a cameraman to meet him near Lake Mead. The prophet prayed, and within moments, something strange appeared in the sky. It was 2 bright spherical objects hovering and slowly moving in the distance. The cameraman caught them clearly on video as they floated across the sky. The footage aired live, and people who were watching could see it happen in real time. This wasn't a quick flash or something easily dismissed. It stayed visible long enough for everyone to focus on it. Prophet Yahweh said he heard a voice in his head telling him when the UFOs would appear and where to look. But was this really the case? I mean, that is obviously very hard to believe. Could the objects have been balloons, drones, aircraft? Maybe, but they didn't seem to move like any of those things. The ABC crew didn't offer an explanation, and the event still gets passed around online with no solid answer for what actually showed up in the sky that day. On August 5th, 2009, during a live morning news broadcast on BBC Northeast, anchor Colin Briggs was delivering the day's stories when something strange appeared on the screen behind him. It was this wide shot of the Millennium Bridge in Newcastle, coming from the BBC's live webcam feed. Suddenly, this white streak of light zips across the frame, not falling downward, but shooting further into the sky before disappearing. The object was fast moving, but clear enough that viewers noticed, and people started recording it from their televisions and quickly shared the clips online. Some said it was a bird, a toy plane, but it doesn't really look like either of those things to me, and it didn't to Nick Pope, who is a former UK Ministry of Defence UFO investigator. He reviewed the slowdown footage and said it didn't look like a bird and that the movement was genuinely strange. The BBC later did a follow-up asking for viewer opinions, but never provided a final answer or any definitive of explanation for what happened. On February 11th, 2013, during an afternoon broadcast on KRTV in Great Falls, Montana, during an episode of the Steve Wilkos Show, the emergency alert system suddenly cut in. Thank God, everyone said. Why was I watching the Steve Wilkos Show? Suddenly, though, viewers heard this voice calmly announce that the, quote, bodies of the dead are rising from their graves and attacking the living.
Civil authorities in your area have reported that the bodies of the dead are rising from their graves and attacking the living.
The message warned people not to approach these zombies and to wait for further instructions. It sounded pretty official and used the same tones and format as real emergency alerts. Within hours, similar hoax messages interrupted TV stations in Michigan, Wisconsin, and New Mexico. Even more strange, 2 days later, a radio station in La Crosse, Wisconsin played a recording of the hoax alert and accidentally triggered the EAS again, rebroadcasting the zombie warning to viewers who thought it was happening all over again. Investigators later confirmed that hackers had exploited a weak security on the emergency broadcast equipment, in many cases using default passwords that were still active. The hackers were eventually caught, but as for how exactly they did this, that's never been disclosed, probably for obvious reasons. On January 3rd, 2007, people in Australia were watching Mayday Head-On Collision, a documentary about air travel disasters, when something very weird happened. In the middle of the broadcast on Channel 7, the original audio suddenly cut out and was replaced with a looping clip from an old news story about a Halliburton convoy ambush.
Lord, Jesus Christ, help us all, Lord. Jesus Christ, help us all, Lord.
The audio was just a truck driver named Preston Wheeler screaming, "Jesus Christ, help us all, Lord," over and over. The audio kept repeating that same line for 5 solid minutes while the visuals from the documentary kept playing. Nobody knew how this happened. One viewer said he kept calling the station while it was happening, but no one answered the phones. There was no follow-up, no investigation. Channel 7 just brushed it off and moved on. This one is very eerie, though. On October 2nd, 2014, Colette Provencher was delivering a live weather report on TVA News from the rooftop of the network's building in Montreal. As she talked, a bright green orb floated across the sky behind her. She didn't notice anything at the time, but viewers definitely did. The footage spread online, and people started arguing about what the glowing object actually was. Some said it was just a meteor. Others pointed out that the object looked way too big and wasn't moving like a typical shooting star. It also seemed to slow down mid-flight, which doesn't make sense for a meteor. The orb stayed visible for several seconds and didn't burn out like you'd expect. In 2007, viewers of a Czech TV's Sunday morning show Panorama got a pretty disturbing surprise. The program usually just airs quiet, scenic shots from mountain resorts, basically tourism ads. But on June 17th, the feed from one of the cameras suddenly showed what looked like a small nuclear explosion going off in the countryside. It only lasted a few seconds and ended in static. This was subtle enough that some viewers didn't know if it was real or not, but the explosion was actually fake. It was CGI, planted by a local art collective. They'd physically tampered with the mountaintop camera to inject their pre-recorded video into the live broadcast. It's a creepy video. Really hits that analog horror kind of vibe before the analog horror genre was fully formed. Just this shot of a calm, scenic landscape with lazy elevator music playing in the background, and then this horrific explosion going off in the distance, totally offsetting everything. It all looks pretty convincing too. The group had pulled off other stunts before, but this one hit a nerve, especially with tourism businesses in the area who said it could scare visitors away. Czech TV considered legal action, but the group framed it as a kind of social experiment about media trust, forcing people to question what they were seeing on TV. In 1985, 4 Polish scientists pulled off something that looked more like a science fair project than a protest, but really rattled the government. These were astronomers, not hackers, and they used a ZX Spectrum home computer, some homemade circuits, and a transmitter to beam anti-regime messages right onto state-run TV in the city of Torun. Overlaid on the screen was text saying, "Solidarity, Torun. Boycotting the election is our duty." And "Solidarity, Torun. Enough price hikes, lies, and repression." All of it was signed with the logo of banned labor movement. Viewers at home were probably stunned to see the state's broadcast suddenly taken over by what looked like on-screen subtitles calling out the system. It didn't last long, but it did make a point. The 4 scientists were eventually caught and charged with owning an illegal transmitter and publishing what was labeled dangerous material. They received 4 months in jail and a fine.